Terran Storm Protocol activated, panic spread. Part 1. Ambassador was reviewing trade agreements when every screen in her office turned red. The emergency alert cut through all other signals, its tone designed to grab attention from species across the galaxy. She sat up straight, her crystalline fingers hovering over the control panel as words appeared in bold letters across her displays. Terran Storm Protocol ACTIVATED. She stared at the message for 3 full seconds before her mind caught up with what she was seeing. In all her years serving the Ashen Collective on the Galactic Council, she had never seen this particular alert. She knew what it meant in theory. Every diplomat did. It was one of those protocols that got mentioned in briefings, filed away as something that would probably never happen. But it was happening now. Activated her communicator and called the council chambers. The response was immediate chaos. She could hear dozens of voices talking over each other, translators struggling to keep up with the panic. She switched to the visual feed and saw representatives from 40 different species all trying to speak at once. The delegate was shouting something about human overreaction. The observer was demanding an explanation. The ancient were simply watching in silence, which somehow felt more ominous than all the shouting. Killed the feed and pulled up information on the Storm Protocol itself. There wasn't much in the public databases. Humanity had filed the notification when they joined the Council 300 years ago, as required by law. All member species had to declare their emergency military protocols. Most species had fairly standard ones involving fleet mobilization and defensive positions. The human protocol was different. It was vague on specifics but clear on one thing: complete military activation in response to attacks on human civilians. What made it unusual was the scope. Most species' emergency protocols were defensive. The Storm Protocol made no mention of defense at all. Her door chimed. She looked up to see Ambassador, the human representative she'd worked with for the past 15 years, standing in her doorway with a travel case. "I came to say goodbye," said quietly. Felt something cold settle in her stomach. Was always calm, always diplomatic. They'd shared meals together, discussed philosophy, even argued about art. In all that time, she'd never seen him look quite like this. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He looked sad. "What's happening?" she asked. "The took New Providence, we all know that. The council was already preparing sanctions. Why this? Why now?" Set his case down and sat in the chair across from her desk without being invited. It was a breach of protocol, but didn't comment on it. "They enslaved 17,000 humans," said. "Men, women, children. They put them in labor camps. When New Providence's governor protested, they executed him and broadcast it across their empire as a warning. I know it's horrible, but the council was handling it. We were." "The council was drafting strongly worded letters," interrupted. His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now, something hard. "They have been watching how the council responds to these things for decades. They knew they'd face sanctions, maybe some trade restrictions. They calculated that enslaving a human colony was worth the political cost." Opened her mouth to respond, but held up a hand. "I argued against activation," he said. "I told Earth's leadership that we should give the Council more time. I believed in the system. I believed in diplomacy." He paused. "But I was the only human who voted against activation. The tally was 47 billion to 1. The number made translator glitch for a moment. Humanity had voted. Not their government, not their military. The entire species had voted, and they'd been nearly unanimous. "What does the protocol actually do?" she asked. Stood and picked up his case. "Every human in non-allied space is coming home. Every merchant ship, every research station, every embassy. We're clearing a corridor between Earth and space. The Council has 48 hours to evacuate any ships or stations they don't want caught in what's coming." "What's coming?" Looked at her. and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that reminded her that humans came from that their planet had tried to kill them in a million different ways, and they'd not only survived but thrived. "A storm," he said simply, then he left. Sat in silence for a long moment before pulling up everything she could find about human military capabilities. Like most council members, she'd reviewed the basics when humanity joined. They had a respectable fleet, good technology, though nothing revolutionary. Their ground forces were well trained, nothing that would threaten a major power like the Dominion. But as she dug deeper, she started noticing things. Human merchant ships had filed flight plans covering nearly every system in Council space over the past 3 centuries. Their research stations had been studying everything from stellar cartography to exotic matter physics. Their cultural exchange programs had put human students and observers in practically every major civilization. It looked like normal behavior for an eager young species wanting to learn and integrate. But if you looked at it a different way, it looked like reconnaissance. Her communicator buzzed. It was her intelligence chief, N. "Ambassador, you need to see this," he said without preamble. She switched to the data feed he was sending. It showed tracking information for human vessels across the galaxy. As she watched, hundreds of markers began moving, not fleeing in panic but executing precise, coordinated movements. Trade ships broke off from their routes and formed convoys. Research stations transmitted data bursts and then went dark. Embassy staff departed in organized groups. "They're not running," N said. "They're repositioning." Watched a merchant convoy that had been 3 days from her suddenly change course. Within 2 hours, every human vessel in Ashen space was moving toward the border. Not rushing, not transmitting distress signals, just leaving. "How long have they been planning this?" she asked. "I've been cross-referencing their activities over the past century," N replied. "Every trade route they established can be converted into a supply line. Every joint military exercise they participated in mapped our tactical responses. Every cultural exchange program placed observers in strategic locations." "You're saying they've been preparing for war since they joined the Council." "I'm saying they've been preparing for the possibility. There's a difference." N paused. "Ambassador, I pulled their data. Earth isn't just it's possibly the most hostile inhabited planet in Council space. Extreme weather, aggressive fauna, limited resources. And humans didn't just survive there. They became the apex predators." Pulled up Earth's file. She'd seen it before, of course, but she'd never really studied it. The survival rate for children before they developed medicine. The number of extinction-level events they'd survived. The fact that they'd fought each other in massive wars even as they developed space travel. "They tried to be what we wanted," she said quietly. "They wanted to fit in, but we just reminded them what they really are." 48 hours after the activation, the Galactic Council received a transmission from Earth's High Command. It was brief and formal. They acknowledged the activation of the Storm Protocol. They listed the sectors they were declaring as active military zones. They politely requested that all non-hostile vessels avoid those areas for the next 90 days. And they included one final line. "The Dominion will release all human captives and cease all hostile operations against human interests. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact." The High Command responded with what they clearly thought was a show of strength. They mobilized their fleet, declared the human demands to be an act of war, and threatened to execute the human captives if Earth didn't withdraw its forces. It was exactly the wrong response. Was in the council chambers when the first reports came in. A border station had gone silent, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. They were claiming technical difficulties, but everyone in the chamber knew better. The storm had begun. Tried to contact, but all human diplomatic channels were offline. She tried calling human trade representatives, cultural liaisons, anyone. Nothing. It was like humanity had pulled back behind a wall, and that wall was absolute. She finally got through to a human civilian freighter captain, who was one of the last to leave Ashen space. The woman's face on the screen looked tired. "I'm sorry, Ambassador," the captain said. "I know this isn't what you wanted, it's not what we wanted either, but the vote was the vote. When one of us is attacked, all of us respond. That's the rule. That's always been the rule." "But why this way?" asked. "Why not work with the Council? Why not?" "Because the Council has been letting species like the get away with things for too long," the captain said. Her voice wasn't angry, just matter of fact. "I've been hauling cargo in this galaxy for 30 years. I've seen 3 different species take slaves. I've seen pirates operate with impunity because nobody wants to commit the resources to stop them. The Council talks a lot, but when it comes time to actually do something, there's always a reason to wait." "We're trying to maintain peace," protested. "You're maintaining the status," the captain corrected. "There's a difference, and the status just decided that human lives were acceptable losses." She shook her head. "We spent 300 years trying to prove we weren't the violent everyone feared. We tried to be good galactic citizens. But you know what we learned from our own history? Peace only works when everyone agrees to it. When someone breaks that agreement, you have to respond or they'll keep breaking it." The transmission ended and was left staring at a blank screen. Over the next week, more reports filtered in from space. Whole military installations going offline. Communication networks failing. Supply convoys disappearing. They were trying to respond, but they were clearly fighting something they didn't understand. Pulled up every analysis her intelligence service could provide. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its efficiency. The humans weren't fighting a traditional war. They weren't trying to hold territory or conquer systems. They were systematically dismantling the Dominion's ability to function as a military power. And they were doing it fast. "They're not angry," N said during one briefing. "That's what's so frightening about this. Angry species make mistakes, they overcommit, they leave openings. The humans aren't angry, they're just removing a problem." Thought about sad expression when he'd said goodbye. About the freighter captain's matter-of-fact tone. About the efficient, coordinated withdrawal of every human from the galaxy. They weren't doing this in rage. They were doing this because they decided it was necessary. And that, she realized, was far more dangerous than any amount of anger could ever be. Part 2. The Dominion had ruled its corner of the galaxy for over 2,000 years. Their military doctrine was built on centuries of successful campaigns against dozens of species. Massive dreadnoughts formed the core of their fleet, each one capable of glassing a planet. Their defensive stations controlled every major hyperspace lane in their territory. Their intelligence network had eyes in half the Council's member states. They were confident, they were powerful, and they were completely unprepared for what the humans did next. The first strike came 72 hours after the Storm Protocol activation. A shipyard in the system was working on 3 new dreadnoughts when space itself seemed to tear open. Not at the edge of the system where ships normally entered from hyperspace. Right next to the station. 6 human craft emerged from the tier. They were small, barely larger than shuttles. The station's defensive systems locked on immediately, but before they could fire, the human craft released their payloads and vanished back into the hole in space. The station's commander had perhaps 3 seconds to wonder what had just happened. Then the kinetic impactors struck. They weren't missiles. They weren't energy weapons. They were just chunks of dense metal, moving at 80% of light speed. At that velocity, mass became the most destructive force in the universe. The impactors punched through the station's shields like they weren't even there. Matter meeting matter at relativistic speeds produced explosions that looked like miniature stars being born. The station and all 3 dreadnoughts were gone in under a minute. 12,000 died before they knew they were under attack. That was just the beginning. Over the next week, human strike teams hit 47 targets across space. Shipyards, communication hubs, supply depots, command centers. The pattern was always the same. Impossible jumps directly into secured systems. Kinetic weapons traveling too fast for shields to stop. Then the humans were gone before any response could be organized. But the physical destruction was only one part of the assault. The humans had launched a second, invisible attack that was somehow even more devastating. Commander of the Fifth Fleet was coordinating defensive positions when his tactical display started showing enemy contacts, dozens of them, appearing throughout his assigned sector. He immediately ordered his ships to intercept, only to have 3 captains report that their sensors showed nothing. The contacts weren't real. Then his communications network started relaying contradictory orders. Admiral was apparently ordering the Fifth Fleet to redeploy to 3 different systems simultaneously. When tried to contact the Admiral directly, he got a recorded message saying was currently in a briefing and couldn't be disturbed. Except knew for a fact that was dead. The Admiral's flagship had been one of the first targets hit by the human strikes 3 days ago. "It's in our systems," his communications officer reported, her voice shaking. "Something has infected our entire network. It's creating false data, scrambling orders, redirecting supplies. I can't tell what's real anymore." Stared at his display, watching phantom ships appear and disappear. Somewhere out there, the humans were feeding corrupted data into every military network they could reach. And they were doing it so smoothly that half the time, you couldn't tell what was false and what was real until it was too late. A supply convoy that was supposed to bring ammunition to his fleet ended up at a refueling station 2 systems away. A squadron of fighters scrambled to intercept a fake contact and ran out of fuel before they could return to base. Point defense systems locked up during actual attacks, claiming they were running diagnostic cycles. The military was eating itself alive, and the humans were barely using any ships at all. Watched all of this unfold from the council chambers, and she felt a growing sense of horror. This wasn't a war in any traditional sense. The humans weren't trying to conquer territory. They weren't interested in resources or strategic positions. They were systematically destroying the Dominion's ability to function as a military power. "We need to stop this," the observer said during an emergency session. "The humans have made their point. They've demonstrated their capabilities, but if they keep going, they'll completely destabilize this entire region." "They won't stop until they get what they want," N said. He'd been studying the human attacks obsessively, trying to understand their strategy. "Look at their target selection. They're not hitting civilian infrastructure. They're not attacking population centers. Every single strike is military or directly supports military operations." "What about their cyber attacks?" another delegate asked. "Those are spreading beyond military networks. We're getting reports of civilian communication disruptions." "Collateral damage from targeting military systems," N replied. "And even then, the humans are being surgical. They could crash the entire economy if they wanted to. Instead, they're just crippling military coordination." Had been trying to make contact with Earth's leadership for days. She finally got through to someone in their diplomatic corps, though not. The woman who appeared on her screen introduced herself as Director Martinez. "Ambassador," Martinez said formally, "I understand you've been trying to reach us regarding a ceasefire negotiation." "Yes, the Council is prepared to mediate. They are clearly defeated. There's no need to continue this destruction." "They are not defeated," Martinez corrected. "They still hold New Providence. They still have our people in labor camps. Until that changes, there is no discussion. They're willing to negotiate now. You've made your point. They understand." "With respect, Ambassador, they don't understand anything yet." Martinez's voice was calm, almost gentle. "They thought they could calculate the cost of enslaving humans and determine it was acceptable. They were wrong. We need to make sure everyone in the galaxy understands just how wrong they were." felt frustration rising. You're destroying their entire military. How much more do you need to prove? We're not trying to prove anything, Martinez said. We're removing a threat. The Dominion has enslaved 17 species over the past 500 years. They've committed what you would call war crimes on a scale that defies measurement. And the Council has done nothing but issue statements of concern. The Council operates on consensus. We can't just... We know how the Council operates, Martinez interrupted. We've been part of it for 300 years. We've watched species after species suffer while the Council debated and discussed and ultimately did nothing of substance. We tried to work within that system. We really did. But when our people are being enslaved, we don't have time for debate. The screen went dark and was left staring at her own reflection. In space, the Dominion's leadership was learning exactly what Martinez had meant. Their military was in full retreat, abandoning systems they'd held for centuries. Their economy was collapsing as trade routes disappeared. Their allies were quietly distancing themselves, unwilling to be caught in the path of the storm. And still the humans kept coming. A forward base detected a human fleet approaching and prepared for a major engagement. Every available ship was pulled back to defend the system. It was going to be the first real battle of the war, the moment when they could finally use their numerical superiority to crush the human attackers. The human fleet arrived right on schedule, and then it split apart. What they had read as capital ships were actually dozens of smaller craft flying in formation to mimic a larger sensor signature. They scattered in every direction, each one broadcasting electronic warfare packages that made them look like full-sized warships on sensors. While the fleet was trying to track hundreds of false contacts, the real human strike teams jumped directly into 3 undefended systems behind the front lines and destroyed the supply depots that were supposed to keep the fleet operational. The admiral in charge of the defense was left floating in space after his flagship ran out of fuel, watching on his emergency communicator as his entire strategy fell apart. "They're not fighting us," he reported back to command before his oxygen ran out. "They're not even trying to win battles. They're just making sure we lose." Back on Earth, the human population was following the operation with intense interest. Public displays showed the status of New Providence, the casualty counts, the progress of the liberation effort. But there was no celebration, no cheering, just a grim satisfaction that something was finally being done. Ambassador, who had opposed the activation, found himself in the unusual position of explaining human psychology to his own species. He was interviewed on one of Earth's global networks. "We're not a naturally violent species," he said. "Despite what some in the galaxy think, we don't enjoy this. But we are a species that survived against impossible odds. We learned over millions of years of evolution that when something threatens your group, you remove that threat completely. Not because you want to, but because if you don't, it will come back stronger." The interviewer asked if he still thought activation was a mistake. Was quiet for a long moment. "I think it was inevitable," he finally said. "I wanted to believe the Council would handle it. I wanted to believe that we could solve this without violence. But they made a calculation that human lives were worth less than their expansion goals. And when you make that calculation about any species that evolved you're going to get a response you didn't expect." In the Council chambers was having a similar conversation with N. "How did we miss this?" she asked. 300 years and we never understood what they were really capable of." "Because they didn't want us to know," N replied. "I've been analyzing their behavior since they joined. Every time they demonstrated military capability, they downplayed it. Every weapons test they shared with the Council showed good but not exceptional technology. Every joint operation had them playing support roles. They were hiding their strength. They were hiding their nature," N corrected. "Think about it from their perspective. They're a young species from joining a galaxy full of older, more established powers. What's their best strategy? Make everyone comfortable, be friendly. Show that you're not a threat. Meanwhile, learn everything you can about everyone around you, just in case you need to defend yourself. Pulled up footage of the human attacks, the precision, the coordination, the absolute efficiency of it. They weren't just learning, she said. They were planning. For every contingency, In agreed. I'd bet anything they have operational plans for conflicts with every major power in the Council. Not because they want to fight, but because preparation is how they survive their own planet. It was their last card to play, and the humans called their bluff. Part 3. The battle for New Providence lasted 18 hours. The garrison commander watched his sensor screens light up with incoming contacts and felt a moment of vindication. The humans were finally committing to a direct assault. This was the kind of fight the Dominion understood. Ships against ships, weapons against shields, numbers and firepower. He was wrong about almost everything. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace was larger than any force they deployed so far in the conflict, but it still numbered less than a third of the defensive force. Standard military doctrine said the defenders had an overwhelming advantage. The garrison commander ordered his ships forward confidently. Then the humans did something no one expected. They broadcast on every frequency, in every language, directly to the soldiers. "We know you're following orders," the message said. "We know most of you didn't choose to be here. You have one chance to stand down. Power down your weapons and move your ships away from the planet. You will be treated according to galactic law. You will receive fair trials, but if you choose to fight, we will remove you as obstacles. You have 10 minutes. The garrison commander cut the broadcast from his fleet channels and ordered his ships to open fire. About 80% of them followed his orders. The other 20% quietly powered down their weapons and moved to a holding position at the edge of the system. The garrison commander screamed at them to return to formation, but they ignored him. They'd been watching their empire crumble for 40 days. They'd seen the humans destroy forces 3 times larger than this defensive fleet. They'd heard the reports of human precision, human efficiency, human ruthlessness when opposed. And they'd also heard about how the humans treated prisoners. Medical care, legal representation, prisoner exchanges. The humans fought hard, but they didn't torture. They didn't execute. They followed rules even in the middle of a war. For many of the soldiers, it was an easy choice. The battle itself was brutal and short. The humans had spent 40 days studying how they fought. They knew every tactic, every formation, every standard response. When the ships advanced in their traditional wedge formation, the humans were already moving to exploit the weaknesses in that approach. Human fighters, smaller and faster than craft, swarmed through the defensive lines like insects, targeting weapon systems and engines. Larger human ships used precision strikes to disable rather than destroy when possible. But when ships refused to stand down, the humans showed no hesitation in removing them. The garrison commander's flagship was hit by 3 kinetic impactors in rapid succession. As his ship broke apart around him, his last thought was that he'd never even seen where the shots came from. 18 hours after it began, the battle was over. The orbital defenses were silent. The fleet was destroyed or captured, and human dropships were descending toward the labor camps where 17,000 humans had been held for the past 3 months. Watched the liberation footage that the humans released to the Council. She expected to see revenge, violence, anger. Instead, she saw something that confused her even more. Human soldiers moved through the camps with weapons ready but not firing. They disabled the automated defenses and disarmed the guards, but then medical teams immediately began treating injured alongside the human captives. Engineers started restoring power and water. Supply ships landed with food and medical equipment. A human medic was shown treating a guard who'd been injured in the initial assault. The guard asked why they were helping him after what his people had done. The medic's response was captured on audio. "Because you're wounded and I'm a doctor," she said simply. "What your commanders ordered you to do doesn't change my oath." The human captives were evacuated first, of course. Ships arrived to take them home, back to Earth or to other human colonies. But the humans also set up temporary shelters for displaced civilians, provided food and medicine to the local population, and began organizing elections for a new planetary government. "I don't understand," said T'In as they watched. "They destroyed the military without mercy, but now they're showing compassion to the survivors." "That's the thing about humans," En replied. "They can separate the system from the individuals. They destroyed the Dominion because it was a threat, but individual who surrender, those are just people following orders. The humans understand that because they've been in that position themselves throughout their history." Finally returned to his post at the council 3 days after New Providence was liberated. Met him in the same office where he'd said goodbye 60 days earlier. "You're back," she said. "The storm protocol has been deactivated," replied. He looked tired. Earth's leadership decided that the Dominion no longer represents a threat to human interests. The military objectives have been achieved. Just like that, you dismantle an empire and then just stop. Sat down heavily. "We never wanted to dismantle anything, Ambassador. We wanted our people back safely. The Dominion's collapse was just what happened when they refused to return them peacefully." Pulled up a report on her screen. The Dominion has been broken into 14 separate states. Their military is estimated to be at less than 10% of pre-war capability. 3 of their former subject species have declared independence. The economic damage will take decades to repair. "They enslaved 17 species over 500 years, said quietly. "If their empire falls apart because they can't do that anymore, maybe that's not such a bad thing." "And humanity, what happens now?" Met her eyes. "We go back to what we were doing before. Trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation. We were happy being boring merchants and enthusiastic tourists. We'd like to go back to that." Over the next few weeks, human ships returned to their regular routes. Human diplomats resumed their posts. Human research stations came back online. It was like flipping a switch, watching an entire species shift from war footing back to peacetime operations. But everyone in the galaxy knew things had changed. The Council held a full session to discuss the war and its aftermath. Delegates from every member species gathered to debate what had happened and what it meant for the future. Found herself leading the discussion, partly because of her relationship with, partly because her people had done the most thorough analysis of human capabilities. "We need to address what we learned," she said to the assembly. "For 300 years, we believed we understood humanity. We thought they were a relatively minor power trying to fit into galactic society. We were wrong." She pulled up displays showing human military capabilities, the impossible jump technology, the relativistic weapons, the electronic warfare systems, the precision and coordination of their strikes. "This wasn't developed in the last 60 days, she continued. "This is the result of centuries of research, planning, and preparation. The question is, what else haven't we seen?" A representative from one of the oldest species in the council spoke up. "The question is not what else they have hidden. The question is why they hid it in the first place." Stood to respond. "Because we didn't want you to fear us," he said simply. "Earth's history is full of examples where the powerful were feared, and that fear led to preemptive conflict. We didn't want to be the scary that everyone expected us to be. We wanted to be friends, partners, colleagues." "By lying about your capabilities," someone accused. "By not advertising them," corrected. "We never lied. When asked about our military strength, we gave honest assessments. We just didn't volunteer information about our most advanced systems. Would you?" The chamber fell silent. Every species there had military secrets they didn't share. Every species had capabilities they kept hidden. The humans had just been better at it than most. The difference, the representative said, is that you demonstrated you can and will use those capabilities decisively. The Dominion was a major power. They controlled dozens of systems. They had thousands of ships, and you reduced them to rubble in 60 days. They enslaved our people, replied. His voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. What did you expect us to do? Ask them nicely to stop. Stepped in before the argument could escalate. What we need to understand is what prevents this from happening again. If another species makes the same mistake that did, will humanity respond the same way? Was quiet for a long moment. The storm protocol still exists, he finally said. It was deactivated, not eliminated. If someone attacks human civilians, if someone takes human territory, if someone threatens human survival, then yes, we will respond the same way. That's not peace, someone protested. That's a threat. That's a promise, corrected. We want peace. We genuinely do. We'd be happy to never activate the storm protocol again. But we're also not going to sit quietly while our people are hurt. That's not a threat. That's just honesty about who we are. The debate continued for hours, but eventually, a consensus emerged. Humanity would remain in the council. They would continue their trade and diplomatic relationships, but a new understanding existed. The friendly humans who'd spent 3 centuries being good neighbors could become something very different when threatened. Found afterward in one of the council's meditation gardens. He was sitting on a bench, looking at Earth through the station's massive windows. Will it happen again? She asked, sitting beside him. I hope not, said. I really do, but realistically, probably. There are always going to be species that see kindness as weakness, that interpret diplomacy as inability to fight. They'll test boundaries, push limits, and eventually someone will go too far. And when they do, then the storm comes back. He turned to look at her. We don't enjoy it. Every human death in this conflict weighs on us. Every ship we destroyed represents lives lost. We're not monsters who crave violence, but we're also not victims who accept abuse. What are you then? Smiled slightly. We're survivors. That's all we've ever been. We survived the Ice Age with stone tools. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived 2 world wars and came out the other side determined to be better. We brought that same survival instinct to the stars. And if the galaxy can't accept that, then the galaxy will have to learn, said. We didn't come to the stars to conquer. We came to explore, to learn, to make friends. But we also came prepared to defend what's ours. That's the bargain. We'll be the best neighbors you could ask for, but if you threaten us, we'll be something else entirely. Looked out at the stars, at the thousands of systems that made up the Galactic Council. Somewhere out there, the remnants of the Dominion were rebuilding. Former subject species were celebrating their freedom, and everyone was learning the same lesson. Humanity had shown the galaxy 2 faces. The friendly face of traders and diplomats and scientists, and the other face, the one that emerged when you pushed too hard. The face of a species that had clawed its way to the top of its food chain and wasn't about to let anyone push them back down. Will you vote against activation if it happens again? Asked. Thought about it? I don't know, he admitted. I still believe in diplomacy. I still think most problems can be solved without violence, but I also watched what they did to New Providence. I saw the labor camps, the executions, the casual cruelty, and I realized that some problems don't have diplomatic solutions. He stood up, preparing to leave. The vote was 47 billion to 1 this time. If it happens again, I don't think I'll be the one anymore. Watched him go, then turned back to the window. In the distance, she could see human ships moving through the commercial lanes, returning to their normal routes. Life was going back to normal. The storm had passed. But everyone in the galaxy now knew it could come back. All it would take was one more species making the same mistake they had made. One more species deciding that human lives were acceptable losses. Hope that lesson had been learned, but she was realistic enough to know that hope wasn't certainty. Somewhere, sometime, someone would forget. Someone would think they could get away with it. Someone would push the humans too far. And when that happened, the storm would return. Not because humanity wanted it to, but because they decided long ago that survival meant never accepting threats to their people. The galaxy would just have to live with that knowledge. The friendly humans who'd spent 3 centuries being model citizens weren't gone. They were still there, still eager to trade and learn and cooperate. But now everyone knew what lay beneath that friendly exterior. A species of survivors who turned their instincts into the most effective military doctrine the galaxy had ever seen. A species that preferred peace but was fully prepared for war. A species that would smile and trade with you one day and systematically dismantle your empire the next if you gave them reason. The humans had activated their storm protocol, and in 60 days, they'd changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Then they'd deactivated it and gone back to being friendly neighbors. That paradox, realized, was what made them truly dangerous. They didn't want to dominate. They didn't want to conquer. They just wanted to be left alone to live their lives. And they'd proven they were willing to do whatever it took to ensure that happened.